Hello and welcome to the State of the Fleet Industry, a weekly video series produced by Automotive Fleet magazine. I'm Mike Antich, editor of Automotive Fleet, and today I'd like to examine what's occurring in the fleet industry for the week of October 24th, 2022. And for this week's report, I want to discuss the low inventory of diesel fuel available in today's market. And this low inventory has triggered record diesel prices, which in turn is creating additional inflationary pressures in not only the fleet market, but the U.S. economy in general. So, how low are today's stockpiles in diesel fuel in the US? Well, on average, diesel stockpiles today are 30% lower than what they have traditionally been at this time of year. And this low inventory of diesel fuel is alarming many industry analysts who cover the diesel fuel market. So, for instance, as of October 21, 2022, diesel supply in the US is down to 25 days, which means diesel inventories are at their lowest level for this time of year since 2008, according to the US Department of Energy. And there's a direct correlation between the low inventory of diesel and the price at retail pumps. The low supply is exerting upward pressure on the price of diesel, especially since there's an ongoing strong demand for the product. And this ongoing escalation in diesel prices over the past 2 years has been dramatic. So, for instance, during the height of the pandemic, the retail price per gallon of number 2 diesel bottomed at $2.39 in May of 2020. But since then, the price of number 2 diesel has been steadily escalating. In May of 2021, the price of number 2 diesel hit $3.25 per gallon. And then 12 months later, in May 2022, it hit an all-time record retail price of $5.51 per gallon. Today, as of October 2022, the retail price per gallon for number 2 diesel stands at an average of $5.33, which continues to be at record levels compared to every year prior to this year, 2022. And as I mentioned, there's a direct relationship between the price of diesel and the available inventory of diesel in the marketplace. When diesel stockpiles contracted in April and May of 2022, it created upward pressure on retail prices, which, as we saw, hit record levels. So, why are diesel inventories so low? First, the demand for diesel is very strong, and this is not only the case in the US but globally, and it's draining diesel stockpiles at a rate faster than can be replenished. So, why is that occurring? Well, the bottleneck is refining capacity. We can't refine petroleum fast enough into diesel fuel to keep up with the demand. And these refining constraints in the US will be a problem that persists far into the future. And why do I say this? Well, I make this assertion because there's not been a new high-capacity oil refinery built in the US in the past 45 years. That's almost half a century. The last high-capacity refinery built in the US was in 1977, which is the Marathon facility in Garyville, Louisiana, which has the capability of refining 578,000 barrels of oil per calendar day. It's massive. This is the third largest refinery in the country, but nothing of this size has been built since then, and that was over 4 decades ago. And the reason there's been a standstill in building new oil refineries in the US comes down to a term called NIMBY, and it's an acronym which stands for Not in My Backyard. Realistically, who wants a refinery in their neighborhood? And as a result, there is a tremendous public opposition to the building of new refineries, which means for the foreseeable future, there will continue to be refinery constraints in the US. And because there are fewer refineries, they are all running at near capacity, in some cases at 95% capacity. US refineries are running hard to replenish low diesel inventories, but the limited number of refineries means that they're unable to keep up with today's demand. But this isn't the only factor. Other factors causing the decreased stockpile in diesel fuel are the sanctions against Russian oil exports. And Russia is the second largest oil exporter in the world. These sanctions against the export and import of Russian oil has started to create decreased diesel inventories in Europe and Latin America. And as a result, there's been a strong demand on the US to export oil or refined diesel to these countries. And as a consequence, these demands from European and Latin American countries are now conflicting with the demands and needs of the US economy. So, as you can see, this is a very complicated situation, especially since diesel fuel is the workhorse of every major economy around the world, resulting in the burning of 28 million barrels of diesel fuel every day in and day out. In fact, the US economy alone burns around 3 million barrels of diesel per day. And the higher cost of diesel creates inflationary pricing pressures throughout an economy. So, for instance, when the cost to transport goods increases, these increased costs are passed on to end users. And here's just one example. Target, the nationwide retail chain, says that in calendar year 2022, it anticipates $1 billion in incremental freight costs, not total freight costs, but incremental additional costs up and beyond what they normally have to pay to ship products to their stores. The high cost of diesel impacts not only them, but every industrial segment in the US. Diesel not only powers trucks and trains, it also powers container ships that bring exported products to the US. The higher cost of diesel translates into higher shipping costs, which in turn are passed on to consumers as inflationary cost increases. And likewise, the heavy construction industry is completely dependent on diesel since it powers much of the construction equipment that builds major construction projects, which puts upward pressure on construction costs. And likewise, diesel is crucial to agricultural businesses since diesel powers tractors and combines that plow the fields or harvest the crops. In addition, diesel is heavily used in agriculture to power water pumps that irrigate the fields of newly planted crops. And these increased production costs are passed on to the consumer in the way of higher food prices. So, why haven't diesel prices moderated in recent months as have gasoline prices? Or more to the point, why do diesel prices continue to be higher than gasoline prices? Historically, at one time, diesel prices were always lower than gasoline prices. However, that all changed in September of 2004 when diesel fuel transitioned to ultra low sulfur diesel, which increased production and distribution costs, making it more expensive than gasoline. And second, the federal excise tax on diesel fuel is 6 cents higher per gallon than the federal excise tax on regular grade gasoline. These two factors are what have caused diesel to be more expensive than gasoline. And one reason why gasoline prices have declined in recent months from their record highs was due to the Biden administration's release of 180 million barrels of crude oil from the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And although there is currently not a supply disruption, the record oil prices prompted the Biden administration to use this reserve as a mechanism to quickly increase the supply of petroleum in the market. And the idea is that the higher the supply of crude oil in the marketplace will put downward pressure on retail prices, and it did do that temporarily. However, this strategy can only go so far. Siphoning crude oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve only results in short-term moderations on fuel prices. So, what is the long term forecast? The best place to determine what will happen with future pricing is in the futures market, which is where you can buy and sell commodities at predetermined prices for delivery at a specified time in the future. And the forecast in the futures market is that what will ultimately bring down the price of diesel and increase the inventory of diesel fuel will be a recession. And it's a recession that everyone is predicting. A recession would slow down end user demand and industrial activity, which in turn will put downward pressure on fuel consumption. So, with this as my final observation, I'd like to conclude my State of the Fleet Industry presentation for the week of October 24th, 2022, and I'd like to thank you for watching.